welcome everyone who has taken the time to join us today. Today we are being joined by Sarah Babb, and we're so lucky to have you here, Sarah. As a quick intro, for those of you who are here for the first time, my name is Nasiako. I am the content producer at Heavy Chef at the moment, and we just really focus on trying to inspire and empower entrepreneurs here. So this space is really for us to share stories and build a community. And so if you feel so moved, you can switch on your camera, you can raise your hand, you can unmute your mic, or drop your thoughts in the chat just so that we can keep the conversation flowing. Let us know your thoughts and questions. But yeah, Sarah, who is here with us today, is an organizational psychologist, systems thinker, highly experienced leadership and organizational change expert. It's a mouthful. And she is also the founder of Stimm, which is a company that is founded to stimulate neuro-inclusive communities and cultures in workplaces. Now, I'm really excited about the fact that we're speaking about neurodivergence today, because I myself also got a little diagnosis in I think it was my first year of university. I got diagnosed with ADHD. Sorry, not my first year of university, my first year of my postgrad of university, which is pretty common for women to be diagnosed in their 20s rather than in their teens. So I'm excited for us to unpack that and talk about that a little bit. But Sarah, if you just want to kick us off and just explain what neurodiversity is and what it is that you do at Stimm.
Yeah, super. Thanks so much. And yes, to get straight into it, I mean, neurodiversity is a bit like a thumbprint. We're all different in how our brains are wired, what we like, what we don't, how we process the world, how we see the world. And this is a great thing to have. So it allows us to be entrepreneurial, to create new things. So within that, neurodivergence is a particular way that your brain may be wired. And there's some categories that have been developed to sort of chunk those together. So you might be neurodivergent, where your brain might be like ourselves, ADHD, where we really have a lower dopamine. So we're inspired by novelty and change and risk and seeing the world differently and being creative. There's some super strengths that come with that. Right through to autism, which is a brain wiring, a way of processing information and your sensory environment, which allows you to hyper-focus and be super ability to absorb data, to be critical about problem solving. And you may then find it a bit overwhelming in terms of sensory experiences. Through to dyslexia, which is a brain processing difficulty in spelling. But that also gives a strength of not a reliance on written word, but actually a great strength in reading the room and teams and understanding dynamics that are going on. There's a huge spectrum. So that neurodivergence includes Tourette's syndrome. If any of you watch the BAFTA Awards, there's quite a debate going on around that. But the involuntary tic, like Billie Eilish also has that, and singing has helped her. Through to dyspraxia and dyscalculia. So it's a different wiring in your brain. It's not a medical deficit. It's not a condition that needs to be fixed, or it's not degenerative, which makes it different from other neurological conditions. It's just a way of wiring, seeing the world, processing information and working with it. We're really beginning to understand a bit around that and what that means and what strengths that brings that we can work with.
Yeah, and I love that you said it doesn't need to be fixed, because I think for years before my diagnosis, I was like, well, there's something wrong with me, and we need to figure it out so that it can be figured out and fixed, and I'll be better. And I think one of the first things they tell you as soon as you get diagnosed is there's nothing wrong with you. This is just the way that you are, and you need to find a way to work around that. So can we talk about some of the strengths that maybe people don't know about neurodiverse people?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think the thing is that it is the largest neuro minorities. We make up 30% of the population in its full spectrum. Now the numbers are rising because I think at schools, there's some schools that are more aware and supporting diagnosis. Certainly amongst women, the research is showing that the link with hormonal fluctuations means it's harder to mask. So the diagnosis is going up. Now, this is a good thing because we're understanding ourselves, we're understanding what we need to support us and to bring our best selves to work. So those strengths that we bring, and I really must just put a disclaimer, everybody presents differently, right? So even within ADHD, there's the hyperactive, there's the inattentive and combined, they're different types. So we are generalizing, but I want to put the disclaimer, that doesn't mean there are boxes we put ourselves in. It's like, so the strengths of ADHD, and I was actually reading a paper yesterday, a new research paper on entrepreneurship too, in that what ADHD brain brings is that ability to view trends. There's a lot more intuitive decision making. We're bringing our gut to understand what's happening. We can read rooms much quicker. We spot trends. There's an innovation. There's a creative thinking. And yes, we're surprised when other people don't see it, because we're like, oh, but it's obvious. I can see it. But it's a strength, and we bring a greater proactiveness, a greater resourcefulness, a greater sense of risk propensity, which for entrepreneurship is a lot why us as ADHDs, I mean, I started my first business at age 28, and I was also like, why are people not seeing this opportunity? There's so much to be done here. So that risk propensity is a strength in organizations and in your team, that ability to tolerate ambiguity and uncertainty and really be driven, hyper-focused actually to solve the challenge. We get excited about that. So I think just in a nutshell, that would be the ADHD. Autism is a great strength to process a lot of data, to deal with a lot of information. So whether we're thinking of a Greta Thunberg and her early hyper focus on climate change, or whether we're thinking of tech engineers or auditors that can deal with a lot of information, are quite critical thinkers, can solve problems that are quite challenging for other people. So critical thinking. Amazingly, one of the strengths that comes with that is because the autism brain prefers stability and being able to focus in on issues, there also comes a lot of loyalty, because there's a sense of, I'm committing, I can bring what I can. And honesty. Now, some of us might not like that, but it's a strength, right? If you in a new business or a new market, you're wanting to be reading that. And I could go on. Dyslexia also, if we're thinking of a Richard Branson or Steve Bartlett's ADHD, but if you're thinking of Richard Branson and dyslexia, the ability to read a system and be able to read social cues very well and be able to understand, again, opportunities. So because of the wiring, we have a particular way of viewing the world and working with it that are great strengths, if we can understand them and if we can work with them in our teams.
I completely agree. I mean, I've always said that one of my superpowers of ADHD is I can always tell how the movie is going to end, because I can
Exactly.
super loves everyone around me, but we just see the trends, we see the pattern a lot clearer than everyone else.
Yeah, exactly. Doesn't it irritate you when they then introduce like the character at the end and you're like, no, that's like too obvious now.
Exactly. Whenever they look into each other's eyes for a split second, I'm like, you've given it away. Like, what are we supposed to think? I love that so much. And so you also spoke about how, when you have a more diverse workforce, diverse people tend to be more loyal. And so why is it important to have those kinds of skills and people that think that way inside your workforce? How does it help your business do better?
So again, I'm really basing this, I believe, in evidence-based comments too, because we know our own lived experience. But what they found time and time again is that having diverse ways of thinking brings innovation, because you're not just following the trends or the patterns, you're actually seeing things differently, you're solving problems more critically, which allows for innovation, improvement, challenging, and also then the opportunity to improve quality. If you're open to it. So the proviso there is that you can have diversity, but if there isn't inclusion, then you won't see those benefits. So it doesn't just matter that you have diverse thinking, it's how you're including that. How do you allow for conversations? How do you allow for challenges? How do you allow for stretch thinking, taking risks, safe to fail experiments, etc. So there has been shown that there's been quite dramatic improvement in productivity, quality, innovation and growth, actually return on equity for those companies that have inclusion. So I think that it's like a no-brainer. How do we actually encourage that? And the thing is, as an entrepreneur, I don't know, I was very much hiring mini-me's because I felt comfortable with people that were like me. And, then we got on well. And actually, but it wasn't, I made a fatal error in my first appointment of my first operations manager. She was fabulous. We spoke about strategy, high-level thinking. I was like, yes. But actually, I needed someone almost opposite to me that could handle detail, that could handle the minutiae that bored me because of my brain, that could handle the regularity of financial submissions and, all the like, and keeping the slips and the records and the admin side. So I think that's important too, that we want to be looking at a full spectrum of capabilities in our team.
That makes a lot of sense, because I too am not a big fan of anything that's like mundane or repetitive. But we have so many people on the Heavy Chef team that are really good at that. And I've just been so grateful that we have such a diverse team here. And so someone in the chat asked, someone from Stimm Africa is asking, what is your opinion then on personality tests like Enneagram tests and things like that when it comes to trying to recruit diverse workforces?
Yes, so so personality is not neurodivergence, but it does talk to preferences preferences in style of communication, preferences in energy, whether it's extrovert, introvert, whether it's looking task focused or people focused, which is really helpful as an entrepreneur to look at a balance of that in your team too. What I often find with small companies, I was just with one, we were looking at the Strengths Finder 2 weeks ago, and we did a team wheel of the strengths. And amazingly, there was such a focus on innovation and creativity and not enough on the actual structure and execution side. So it is helpful as another lens, absolutely, to look at the preferences of your team, which is different in terms of the hard wiring of your team. So maybe just to draw a distinction there.
I think also sometimes people think that if you have ADHD, you have a certain personality, which I understand, because I think after I read all of the symptoms of ADHD, I was like, what is my personality? I feel like I am just of ADHD. So I think it's super interesting then to try and like find those diverse characteristics. So what are the ways then that we can attract people with neurodiverse ways of thinking? How can we activate that in our company, and how can we bring them to us?
So I think the first thing is to say, as your own business, what is your vision, your purpose, your values, to be super clear. So again, it must come from a premise of, do you really want to be inclusive? Are you really willing to put up with a person that is going to challenge, that is going to bring different perspectives, that's going to look at a different way of working? And then you start signaling in terms of, firstly, what are the skills and what are the strengths that you're looking for? So the skills, what are those skills? Is it administrative excellence? Is it creative problem solving? Is it systemic thinking? Really think through what are those skills and strengths that you want. And then obviously when you're looking at your LinkedIn ad or you're looking at posting an advert, you highlight those. And you're always coming back to consistently, what is the feel of your company? What is the nature of how you want people to engage? And that will signal very strongly to people, and certainly Gen Z and then are self-identifying and looking for workplaces. And the neurodivergent profile, specifically ADHD, would be attracted more to an entrepreneurial style organization. So you have a benefit, I think, of attracting skills that maybe the bigger corporates don't, because there is a seeking for creation, making an impact, having a different social justice, and being included and belonging. So I think there is an advantage you could really play with in terms of saying, as a smaller business, you can offer more flexibility. You don't have 20 loops of bureaucracy to get through to make a decision. We have a team that is agile and will work together. So I would certainly play with that when you're clear on what you want, because you've also got to be prepared to have that flexibility and that space of belonging. So your adverts, and then in your screening, you would not just resort to old selection processes that might exclude people again. So perhaps, do you have to have your camera on? Because maybe the person with autism doesn't want to engage, but has great ideas, in terms of the I'm just again generalizing. Or there's anxiety, so don't give a time-bound test when you don't have to. When you ask questions, send them ahead of the interview. Like, these are the 5 questions I'm going to ask. So then the person can prepare and bring their best selves. So there's little ways in terms of being inclusive and not inadvertently excluding people to bring them into the organization. And then it's about creating that workplace that is vibrant and people can thrive and really bring their best selves.
And when you say creating a workplace that is vibrant and allows people to be their best selves, how can you ensure that, you know, your workplace is actually conducive to a neurodiverse brain? I know you spoke a little bit in your recipe about, you know, the lighting and the sounds and all these things. So why are these things that we should consider? And then what does it look like in practice when we create that environment for our neurodiverse team?
So again, there's a great saying that comes out of the autism understanding is nothing about us without us. So of course, when you have a team, you might ask for preferences or needs. So, and also support people to advocate for themselves. So perhaps if you are in an open plan office and that's just what your resources have, you might allow some people to wear sensory noise cancelling headphones, or you might have a fixed desk for certain people. So I was with a big insurance company that has hot desking and every floor is just open plan, like a nightmare for some neurodivergent brains. But what they did is they did a sensory mapping of the floor. So like, this is where the food is, this is where the noise is, here's a quiet pod, you can sit there. So simple, right? Just so then I can choose, actually, I don't want to be in the foot passage with the noise smells, you know, I can choose that quiet pod. So it's just thoughtfulness about what is needed. That's sensory. In terms of the actual work instructions and work experience, it's also being super clear in instructions, written instructions in advance would help, allowing space or flexibility of work patterns. So how many of us hyper-focus, we want to work till 2 a.m., we're super locked in, but then we might come in a little bit later the next day, right? So depending on that person's work rhythms. Also, what we found, certainly with the ADHD brain, is that task switching is super hard because there's a lot of energy that goes into hyperfocus and we literally can lock out the world, right? And it's so calming for us and so inspiring when we are hyperfocused because we're getting all this dopamine about something we love and we're passionate about. But a workplace can sometimes hoist you out of that and say, oh, now we've got a team meet, now we've got and that can actually be quite exhausting. That code switching they found can be exhausting in your brain. So the idea is also to be, again, just aware and say, we will have a team meet at 1 o'clock. Do you want a reminder? Will you join? It's sensitivity to different people's capacity to work the best they can. So I think there's something about the sensory environment. There's something about the content of the work environment, and then feedback and managing that performance. So there are things like rejection sensitivity dysphoria or anxiety, which is really like hard when you're getting feedback and you take it personally because it's hard to read those cues. That's not to say you don't give the feedback. In fact, you give the feedback much more specifically and evidence-based and not just generally. I remember in one of my first jobs, I love a portfolio. So I love having different things, different organizations, being a researcher but I did try full-time employment and that didn't match me well. And I remember my first manager saying, I said, how am I doing? Because I had like no evidence, right? And it was one of my first jobs. And she said, you're doing fabulously. I said, can you give me an example? And she couldn't. So you can imagine how that left me like really doubting this feedback. So that whole cycle of the environment, how do we manage the work, how do we give feedback, and really looking at even opportunities to develop for the person can step into as they grow. The shift from technical expert to manager is quite a big shift. So just being aware of those transitions as well. Because when I'm very good at my job and a subject matter expert, now you want me to lead a team, it's not an automatic transition for anyone, I think. But for the neurodivergent brain, it's like, how do I now manage other people when I'm really looking at how do I manage myself too, that I can sustain my performance. I do want to touch on burnout, but I'll come back to that.
Yeah, I'll make a note that we do come back to that. That's super important. I love in the chat that Mo has made a reference to Michael Scott from The Office calling everyone into the conference room as an example of neurodiverse people being snatched away from their hyper focus, which is a nightmare. I remember at one of my old jobs, we also had an open plan office with the fluorescent lighting, and the sales team is right next to where I'm supposed to be as a writer, which is really tough when you need to hyper focus. And so when we brought this up to management, we said like, oh, some of us, are really sensitive to all the noise and all the lights and all these things. And they said, absolutely. And they created a little hub in the corner with, quiet little spaces. And they put fluorescent lighting in there as well. And I think that's where what you were saying in your recipe about really asking what it is that your neurodiverse team needs and not assuming that what you're doing is necessarily helping them. I think that's really, really important.
So just one final comment. What's interesting is that a lot of these accommodations, actually a lot of people enjoy and appreciate. It's not just the neurodivergent people too. So it's also important just from an inclusion, that are people feeling they're in their best environment. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Linda Scarborough. Hi, Linda. Linda made a comment in the comments saying that she had a bell at one of her offices that the sales team had to ring. I've been there as well. It's a nightmare. It's like all of a sudden, not only can I not concentrate, but my system has gone into overdrive and I will not be able to concentrate for the foreseeable future. So let's talk a little bit more about, people who think that they might have ADHD. Is this, I know we spoke a little bit at the beginning about diagnoses and whether or not it's important, but if, for example, an entrepreneur thinks that they might have ADHD, what are the steps that they should take, maybe to find out more or maybe to accommodate themselves better in their business? What are the first steps after?
I think it's very much around your own understanding of yourself. Why? So that you can set up an environment that works best for you in work and also in your rhythm of life, that you can really feel like you can bring your best self. And so I do support understanding yourself better. There are online tools you can do self-diagnosis. Maybe because I am ADHD, I was just like, okay, well, that's obvious. It wasn't a big reveal, this self-diagnosis. I think, once you read more about some of the, as you say, how it presents and what it means. And it's nice to not feel alone, because I think initially, certainly when I was younger, I never felt like I fitted in, and I didn't realize there was a super strength, because actually I could move between different groups. I could facilitate because I could I could create different spaces. But at the time, it can feel quite lonely, because you're like, why aren't people getting how I'm thinking? Or why is it no one can see what I can see? So I definitely support reading, the following podcast, doing a self-diagnosis just to understand. If you want to go the diagnosis route, one of my big passions is how do we make diagnosis more accessible and affordable and scalable? But that's something I really think we need to look at for our continent. It is expensive. There are some psychologists that can do it and some that can't. But it is a final confirmation, I think, which might uncover other comorbidities, because there is a correlation sometimes with autism and ADHD. So you have ADHD, which can also be confusing because you're wanting the change and the stability and the routine and the novelty. So it does help then if you want an expert to do that diagnosis. Also, if you are claiming disability, which is another conversation, you do need a formal diagnosis in terms of your whether you're going to be including in your disability numbers neurodivergence. So under the definition of the Employment Equity Act, neurodivergence might cover, depending on the diagnosis, your sensory and your mental impairment or disability. So there is a carrot and a stick, I think, to get the diagnosis done. I think disability is a whole nother conversation, and I think unfortunately also a label. And I think that's often why people don't get diagnosed, because they fear that stigma or that bias or that misunderstanding that might come from disclosing, right? So I think there's also the issue of disclosure. So it really is about understanding yourself first. And then you would see, and how do you create a safe space for people to normalize the conversation like we are now, just normalize the conversation. And I find wherever I have this conversation, there's always, I call it me too, where people are like, yeah, me too, or my child, or my, so it really is, it starts with yourself, understanding yourself, then also helping normalize conversations. And then you can decide if you want to formally diagnose. For disclosure, you can also just if you don't feel safe to disclose that I am autistic or I'm ADHD, you can just disclose my sensory, my processing of sensory environment requires, or I feel can be more productive in the quieter zone like you did, or I need to be able to work at 10 p.m., or this deadline's not working, etc. So you can also be disclosing the behaviors or the accommodations you need without having to go. So I think there's a spectrum in terms of, but yes, I would definitely support it. I actually had somebody in an organization I'm coaching, neurodiversity coaching, and this organization is very supportive in helping and paying for the person to be diagnosed, which was amazing. But then he had challenges with how to have the conversation with his family, because his family didn't have an awareness. So I think we also want to be supporting the conversations and just finding the languaging of a strengths-based approach with neurodivergence, beyond even the workplace. So it's supporting the whole person and in their world. So it was quite a challenge for him in that situation.
And I think that's also probably a note for people who love the Me Too thing, who love to relate, to also relate and not minimize. I think a lot of people sometimes actually be like, oh, I also have ADHD. Sometimes I see a bed and then I get distracted too. And it's like, yeah, almost there. You almost had it. So I think that's a really important point on diagnosis. I think that also answers Fred's question. Fred was asking about the importance of diagnosis and its pros and cons. And I think that leads nicely into Janelle's question, which is asking about any specific websites or online tests that you would recommend, or any maybe even resources, free resources that people can go to get a diagnosis.
Can you send you a list after and you can post it? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it would be lovely if we could also drop it in the chat. But yeah, that would be amazing. Yeah, I hope you're okay with that, Janelle, if you're watching. But yeah, I think that would be great. I mean, also just for me as well, because I didn't have any idea of how to get a diagnosis. And I think it was very helpful for me that I was in university, because they have subsidized programs where you can get a diagnosis as a scholar. So I think also it's important for people to look into that as well. We have a comment here from Maud. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Maud Berger-Smith. She says this is a great point. And she thinks a lot of these preferences are across humans. She sees that there is a challenge between traditional ways of working and communicating and preferences. As an example, if a manager wants to have a call with a video to build more morale across a virtual team, an employee diagnosed with autism might not want to have their video on, and the manager might be upset, making the team feel distant. Yeah, I've experienced something like this myself. I don't know if you've seen this in your team, Sarah, but I've had, one employee I asked, hey, can you put this in writing? She loved to call and be like, do this.
Yes.
Amazing, yes. Great. Please put it in writing for me just so I can remember, because I'll forget. And she thought that I was being facetious. So yeah, I don't know if you've experienced anything like that, Sarah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think your point is so important, because it's important as a manager with a team to also be normalizing the conversations in the team. And the thing with accommodations is they need to be reasonable and fair, but also understood. Because a team member, why is that person getting time off and they can and I can't, or I have to go to the function and they don't? So I think it's very important to manage those dynamics in the team. And again, it's around having a safe space where people can share. This is why I find it hard to have my camera on, or this is why I do feel completely exhausted. We all learned with COVID how exhausting this sort of Zoom, having Zoom fatigue was. So it's about the manager, I think, understanding. It's about the individual being able to advocate, and also for the team to find a rhythm that can work. So there will be times the neurodivergence cannot be an excuse for abdicating out of work or out of situations, but it certainly does help find ways that can work for everybody. So in some cases, what we have is we have cameras on for some time, and then we can all have cameras off. We have some times that are like non-contact times, so no meeting times. So there are times where we know we can't call on each other for meetings, and we found that rhythm that works for people in the team. So that's a very important point. And again, and each one would be different in terms of what the presentation is or what the need is. I also advocate for moving away from this individual approach. So we're in a maturity spectrum from awareness to inclusion. Now, we start off with awareness, saying that I know a few people and we'll have some accommodations for them, but actually, if we're looking at it, we could look at from a team or a company perspective, our approach is to be inclusive of everybody. And within that, there are different needs. And so there we have a culture and we have practices that suit the best performance, and not just because here's an exception. So I think it's moving away from the exception to this is how we work, which can be phenomenal. It takes some time as a good manager, knowing your team, knowing what's needed, and finding and exploring, experimenting, trying different ways.
Yes, and being open. I completely agree with that. I think that we can probably move on to speaking a little bit more about burnout, as you mentioned earlier. So Natasha has left a comment as well, saying that yesterday she felt she had to call in sick because she had a sensory-induced migraine. And she's wanting to know how she can navigate this without feeling guilt, as someone who was recently diagnosed with ADHD and still wrapping her head around how to get support and navigating having this label. So how does one, I think maybe first it might be helpful to answer, like, why is burnout such an issue for neurodiverse people? And then how do they navigate the guilt of that?
Yeah, thank you. And just well done for actually understanding and calling. And I'm sorry it got to a point where you had a migraine. And I think that's what we want to understand ourselves so we don't get to that point of migraine and certainly burnout. Because one of the things, and with ADHD, I think, so I'm ADHD with autistic traits. I'm not quite ADHD, but I get that inner challenge because there's a drive for perfection and detail and solving, and there's a drive for change and innovation. And the internal dialogue can be quite tiring in and of itself. But then being able to advocate for what you need is another level of feeling comfortable and experimenting and finding ways so that we don't get to that stage of not being well. The emotional regulation, what happens is we also, because we are driven by dopamine with the ADHD side, is that we keep going. And actually we feel like our place of safety is when you have dopamine. So this is why I used to love paragliding, and now I've gone back to scuba diving, because for me, it's the most calming thing to be under the sea, watching a shark go past me. It's so calming. People are like, wow, don't you panic. I'm like, it's beautiful. My brain is quiet, right? But if we keep seeking that and we don't find ways to replenish and recover on a regular basis, that does mean our body system just cannot then, I say I've hit my limit. So my daughter's an extrovert and she loves the mall. I can't bear the shopping mall. But I do it for her because she's a teenager and this is her like source of joy. But on Sunday, she can see like when I've hit my limit, I'm like, okay, I'm at my limit. We got to go now, you know? So it's like, that's an understanding for myself. So if we do hit burnout, we do find with neurodivergence, it hits harder because it's not just, because people say, oh, just rest or meditate. It's my wiring is to seek dopamine. So it's not about, it's not just about taking a rest. So we really want to find ways where we can be aware, where we can step away sooner for shorter periods, where we can find hobbies or sports or ways that are healthy to feed our ways of working, that we do find, I call it micro moments of transition. So where we can be saying, okay, now we mentally said our brain, I'm coming back to you So it's not like we feel like we're losing something, because there's also, I don't know about, I'm sitting with 20 tabs open on my computer. We have object impermanence. We think if it's closed, it's gone, right? So we need to also set our brains. It's not like you've lost your focus or your passion, but I am going to come back to you. And it helps with that code switching, with that way of like giving yourself permission just to step out, to replenish, to reconnect. Physical movement, because we're in our brains so much. Physical movement, dancing, being in water, music, smells, sights, sounds, breathing, just coming back to our breath, are all ways that just bring our brain back connected to our body. But experiment with things that you like. So Fred knows, but I discovered CrossFit, which gives me amazing little dopamine hits every time. And it's a healthy way just to get back into my body. So it really is first understanding. So well done on that. And then it's finding ways that you can every day just find a little reset in a way that's genuine for you. And then what you also want to look at then is advocating. So there was somebody I was working with who found that having a pot plant, she could connect her brain to a different space. So she just advocated to have a pot plant on her desk at work because she didn't have a window. So there's really little ways that we can do that. Also support, just this final thought. So just to have support people that understand or that can help, can see the cues of when it feels like you're just on a treadmill that can't stop. That really helps. So whether it's a colleague or somebody in the family, or, just to say, okay, hey, are you there? Really helps too.
Yeah. I think those are really good points, advocating and support, especially I sometimes think that, in speaking to Natasha's point on the guilt.
I think on that too. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So I think sometimes trying to navigate that guilt can be tough because it's not something that you can necessarily change. And in fact, stressing about trying to change it makes it worse.
Yes.
Or maybe you can speak on some of that.
There is definitely a neurodivergent experience the shame guilt cycle really quickly, because we like, okay, I can't keep up, so I have to work harder. And then we still, because we're working on this treadmill, we don't quite feel like we're able to meet it at the right quality or standard that we want, or the right deadline. Then we feel guilty again, so we keep going and it spirals down. So again, it's firstly noticing absolutely the guilt is misplaced, because it's an internal dialogue. But it's really just being compassionate with yourself. Like, I've reached my limit in the mall. I can't do more. Like, literally, my brain just shuts off. Clunk. And that's okay. I'm not letting my daughter down. I'm not a bad mother. We don't need to. So it's just noticing that switch. And then also, it's then about saying, the thing is, it can spiral down. So it's about finding then not big things to fix, not like, oh, now I have to do 5 things to recover or to recuperate or to keep my reputation intact. It's literally compassionate. Say, I'm stopping and I'm going to do one small thing now. Because that helps you then to step up the ladder. So it's about saying, okay, my one small thing is to take an hour's nap. My one small thing is to do that one email. My one small thing is to make that one phone call. So you feel like you just can step out of it. So that's agency. But it definitely all starts with the awareness before we get to that, or noticing when we're close.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. I can't remember who it was who said the best thing to do is the next right thing. And so I think sometimes I'll write out a list and I'm like, oh my God, I have to do all these things and I'll have to do them all now and I have to get them right. Yes, and usually I'll send a really long podcast length voice note to my friend who will say, it sounds like the thing you need to focus on is this one thing. Let's just do that. Or like, maybe you just need to take a shower and then you'll be able to think more clearly, just small things, like just one thing that will help to clear your mind and get out of that loop.
Well, it's interesting with our brains. We don't have this sort of linear thinking. It's exactly like, oh, I can do it all now. Like, my to-do list is ridiculous and I think I can do it in one day. So absolutely, whether it's putting away your phone, because what we also do is then we might want to resort to other ways of numbing or coping, right? Whether it's having that drink or doom scrolling, or then we get lost down another rabbit hole of another tab. So again, just finding that pause button and saying, what's the one thing I can do now? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's also a really good point. I don't think a lot of people know about all of the effects of not treating your ADHD and, you know, all the little thrill-seeking behaviors that ADHDers can have. And I think maybe if entrepreneurs are aware of that, they can also be aware of their bad habits and how they're trying to soothe some of, you know, the issues that they're experiencing. But we have a question here from Louis, who is asking about cultures and ecosystems. He's asking, do certain cultures or ecosystems show higher rates of specific neurodivergent diagnoses? For example, places like Silicon Valley have higher autism spectrum prevalence and they have better diagnostic tools. Do you have anything to say on that?
There is a global prevalence, but certain neurodivergent profiles are more attracted to certain jobs or roles. So I remember going to speak of Mo Gaudat. He was the chief business officer for Google globally. So super tech. And he speaks openly about his neurodivergence. And he says, everyone around me was neurodivergent. So to your point, that in certain roles, there's certain prevalence of preference of way of working. So yes, one might say amongst certain like data analysts or certain tech roles, I'm not saying all, please don't misquote me, but just there would be an attraction of that way of thinking to diagnose and work with detail of problems in certain disciplines, as there is ADHD amongst entrepreneurs, because it's seeking a way of working that can work best with that. So there is a global, no matter country or prevalence or gender, there is a prevalence. But yes, you might find in certain ecosystems higher rates because of the way of thinking and the way of working that it is attracted to it. So it's not causal. That's what I'm trying to get to. So it's not because you're in Silicon Valley, you're probably attracted to that because of a certain way of working. I do think that the diagnosis is still woefully lacking, though. So I think we are seeing, certainly amongst women, there's a doubling of diagnosis. Partly because the tools are now less gender biased, because they were very much based on the stereotype of the young hyperactive boy and based on white men largely. So it's some of the tools, it's becoming less exclusionary, and as people raise awareness, so they're also being diagnosed more. There is a higher prevalence of diagnosis of, for example, autism amongst children. The latest CDC in America is 1 in 31 children are being diagnosed as autistic. But also, again, it's not that because the diagnosis is going up, it's growing. It's been there, and now we are just getting a better picture of the prevalence of it. So it's not cultural, but certainly could be, you could look at certain roles, or I was asked by a company to talk to they've got a group of special skills, critical skills. And there certainly were many people sharing their stories there too. Let me know, Lou, if that answers your question sufficiently. But I do think we need diagnostic tools that are more accessible, and I think there are some tools being developed, which I'm certainly interested in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I think that's such a good point as well about how the diagnoses are doubling, and everyone's like, well, now everyone has ADHD, everyone's a little bit ADHD, and it's just so important to know that the playing ground was not always level, you know, like even the fact that I was diagnosed at 22, the fact that that's common, but most boys are diagnosed at, you know, 10 or 11. I think that's important to know. So yeah, I think it's important for people to listen to themselves and know if they want to go ahead and find out more or not. But we have a question here from Mudupe Olorundoba. I don't know why I tried, but I hope I did it well. Who is asking, Dr. Sarah, do you have any recommendations for actually embracing and sticking with systems or routines for someone who works solo? So she's a remote contractor and she's starting over in a lot of ways in her life. And thank you for sharing that. And she's starting a few projects of her own, and she's trying to rewrite the way she works to fit her wiring better now that she knows this about herself. And she's finding different tools, but she can't even make herself finish onboarding to most. That's can relate to so much.
Wow, so
So do you
nice.
have any recommendations of finding systems and routines for someone who does not thrive on systems or routines?
Exactly. It's so hard. And another tool is then just another thing to remember to do, which is precisely the thing we don't want to do. So I personally find it's more about finding your routine. So when do you feel most engaged? Like when you're starting the new projects, what can you do and when can you do it best in terms of that innovation, that creativity, getting things done? Also to be really clear on things that you're not so good at. And there it might be around finding somebody also in a support system. You're working solo, so it might be a colleague, or maybe you're part of an incubator, or you're part of a group that can reinforce that. And it's being, again, compassionate in terms of if you're needing some downtime, if you're needing some other things, but the pressure of starting up and being on your own, also being aware of that stress that plays out with you. And then I think it's about when there are specific things, for example, like monthly finances or putting your reports together. There, I think it is about clearing space, finding some short ways to get into it. So maybe there's one form to fill out. Maybe there's one email. Again, just keeping it easy to actually get into that so it doesn't feel overwhelming and challenging. I certainly think calendar reminders are useful, but they need to be properly put in. So I can also find I can put 10 calendar into the same half an hour slot, which also doesn't help. So it's again finding if you're needing to get up at 4 a.m. and work till 10 a.m., if that's a good rhythm for you and you're on your own and you can do that, but then don't jump into the next thing. So then have the space to go for a walk or to call a friend. Again, I'm really not wanting to put on anything onto you. And not being tough on yourself if that day is not the day for finance, but then you're wanting to be finding easy ways to connect with it the next day. So I think too many tools is too much. That's certainly a recommendation. Just pick the one, whether it's a simple one, calendar, invite. I had a colleague who had what was called a phone prison. I don't even know if you can get them in this country, but you put your phone in a box and it's got a timer on it. So the box will not unlock until the timer. So you set it for like 2 hours. You cannot get your phone. So you're helping, it helps her get her distractions. She calls herself neurospicy. So, embracing that she will be drawn down these rabbit holes, but just so you're blocking out your routine that blocks out things that will distract you. Focusing on when you can work best around things you love and why you're actually doing this. So keep reminding yourself of that and the longer picture. And then also, yes, finding space and time to stick to the things that you do need support with. And that'll be different for all of us. I don't know if that's helpful.
I think that so perfectly. And we have Linda sharing as well in the chat, saying that she often finds herself comparing herself to others, which fast tracks the shame and guilt. Like you said, she thinks to herself, my colleague so-and-so is fine with this. Why aren't I? Which isn't helpful. And so hard work, decoupling self-worth from productivity. I think that's a heavy one.
Wow. That's a big statement. I really support that. So self-worth is as we are, and not that spiral, just recognizing that spiral. And also, I think the languaging, you've been using it all day, but the languaging of neurodivergent invites the languaging of neurotypical and a contrast. And actually, we're not that we're different. We're all different, and we just happen to be the neuro minority. So I think it's also about if the languaging helps us not see by contrast, right? And there are things you'll be super good at that your colleague isn't good at. So this comparison, the comparison is not helpful, but it's hard to avoid when the world is set up for neurotypical communication and ways of working. So yes, it's about reconnecting and really claiming your strengths. And can we name them? Can we really claim them, own them, embody them, make them shine? Because that's what we bring, right? Is exactly the the strengths that we bring that are just so wonderful. So let's keep celebrating ourselves, and let's find ways that work for us and helping other people actually understand just what that means. Oh, Madupe, thank you, Maud, for raising that. You can absolutely on YouTube and other ways find people that body double. So you could be working and somebody else could be working on the platform that you could link up with, yes. And if that helps you, absolutely. I seem to have missed some questions, Nasi.
Oh, no, we're making our way through.
Okay.
Finding compassion with ourselves and we're going through them one by one. Yeah, I think body doubling is also very, very helpful. And it's interesting that you say there's that contrast between saying neurotypical and how that, implies the neurodivergent and all of that. It's so interesting to me because I know that as neurodivergent people, we somewhat have some sort of like pull towards one another. I find myself being a lot more comfortable with neurodivergent people. So I think I'm really loving that the chat is filled with all of us sharing our stories. And I think it helps us feel a lot less alone. I think sometimes we start to compare ourselves to neurotypicals a lot. So I think it's good that we create spaces like this to talk about all the ways that we're actually not so weird. So yeah, and Fred is also asking here whether there has been any progress in the casual understanding of some of these diagnoses like autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, etc., because it is believed to be hereditary. And are there any environmental factors that we know of? I think that's a really good question.
So I think some of the medical practitioners might argue this. There certainly is at this stage an understanding it is hereditary. And I think the prevalence of, or the experience of it might be informed, like the nature-nurture debate, right? So how you're raised in terms of opportunities to understand and work with it. I thought about this a lot myself because the previous generations might not have understanding, but if I think of my grandmother, she was so clearly ADHD. Now that I understand, I mean, she was doing crazy things, ahead of her time and her generation. So from my own sort of lineage, I can trace it back. But when there hasn't been an understanding or vocalizing of it, it's also hard to pick up necessarily where that would come from or to what extent or to what degree. So that's sort of one generation removed. So it's a bit of a mixed response there. I can certainly send or look into more information about environmental factors, but it's not as some might believe in terms of what you eat or what water you drink, or that would physiologically cause the brain wiring. There is sometimes involuntary neurodivergence that might come from extreme trauma or an accident, or that does rewire just in terms of how you process your environment. So there is known that it could be caused by other things. But at this stage, the conversation is erring towards hereditary.
Yeah, I always find it so funny because when I got my diagnosis, I went and I told my mom, and still to this day, she goes, you're ADHD. I don't know what to do about your ADHD. And then I look at her and I'll see her take something out of the fridge and leave the door open.
Yes, we do that.
Yes, and I'll see her do all these little things. So I'm like, I think I got this ADHD from somewhere, and I think it's in the house. So I always find that really interesting how clear the hereditary nature of ADHD actually is. It's really interesting. Mujuba says that she also wants to work on her strengths, and she needs project management and client management and finance management. Yeah, that can be a lot to juggle, but I think the advice you gave, Sarah, about breaking it down into manageable pieces is very important. Let's see if there are any other questions that we've missed. Janelle also mentions that she has found, in terms of time blocking, when she knows when to start, she might have issues with telling herself when to stop because of the dopamine rush. Do you have any suggestions then, Sarah, on how to combat that and how to deal with that dopamine rush coming in
Yes.
times sometimes?
Yeah, so the question I understand is when to stop. So how to stop. So if there's a point of, okay, it's now I've not slept at all, I need to stop or work with something. So so there is where we understand with neuroscience that there's a thing called code switching, and as I shared earlier with the neurodivergent brain, that takes a lot more energy. So switching takes energy. So the idea is to try and signal to the brain that it's not such a shock. So certainly in this article that I was reading, she spoke about 3 things. So the one is to actually prime the brain that when you stop, there'll be a reward. So it's almost duping it in terms of dopamine. So plan something fun for when you end, right? So I don't know what that'll be for you, but it might be, I don't know, going out for breakfast or a walk in nature or watching something, whatever it is for you, that's just like, okay, my brain can look forward to that. And then also just giving yourself permission to stop. This is also like almost a neuroscience trick of saying, I'm going to stop for 10 minutes. So you're not, again, it's about this fear, because why our brain clings to it is because we want that dopamine and that certainty and that sense of I'm safe in this dopamine. And it's almost like we want to hold on to it. So if you prime your brain, I'm going to stop for 10 minutes. And then it's almost allows that switching, right? So it's understanding the brain switching. And then the other point is she talks about bookmarking it. So it's about saying, I've bookmarked where I'm at. I know where I'm going to come back to. So it's the brain, again, knowing it'll come back. So either you put where you've finished and you're going to come back to that paragraph, or you bookmark where you are in terms of that task. So it knows where it's going to come back to. And then it just in terms of allowing a physical break that can help the brain also transition. So it's really ways just to help that transition. But just telling yourself to stop, almost the brain will want to stay there more because it'll feel ironically fearful to actually stop. So I hope that's helpful too.
Yeah. What even left a comment saying she always asks her neurospicy clients how to make this more fun.
Yes. Really I love I'm catching up on the comments now, but the Neurodivergence Club, there is something. So part of me getting diagnosed was that I also looked around and said, I'm neurotribing. Like, this is so cool. Like, how we can, you just don't need to explain certain things. So we've certainly found in organizations, having circles, I call them circles of connection, makes a huge difference. Just to have whether you have an online presence or just a monthly, regular, or weekly, even a weekly check-in, really, really helps. Yeah.
So
just ambassador. There you go.
Yeah. I volunteer you as tribute. I would love to start this neurodiverse club. I think that's amazing. And I think that also brings us maybe to the question of medication when it comes to ADHD and autism and all these things. There are a lot of things out there, and a lot of parents also have issues with medicating their children, for example, because of they're worried they might become addictive, or they might not learn regular coping mechanisms that might help them to deal with this without that help. So what's your take on that? If an entrepreneur feels that they might be neurodiverse and struggling, when should one seek medication or not?
Yeah, so firstly, medication is not about fixing something. It's about finding a way that your brain can be able to focus on particular things. If it can, so it's not about you need an antibiotic to make it better. So there's a huge range of medications. So I think the first thing is you definitely want an expert opinion, and you want to try different types or different doses depending on what you need, pros and cons, right? So I have a colleague that went straight onto Ritalin. He said it was like what is this, how neurotypical people feel? He felt clear and focused, and it worked dreams for him. I've tried different things. I don't feel a difference at all. And so it really is about what works for you. It can help, and if it helps, fantastic, but not just to automatically think I'm ADHD, I must be on medication. Also pros and cons. Another friend of mine with her daughter was battling with types and doses, and what she found is it helped for the child to concentrate at school, but there was a huge crash at the end of the day because it just took so much more. And then the physiologically to cope, but the brain could cope, but then by the end of the day, the child was just exhausted and quite depressed. So, there is also other effects on serotonin and other things. So yeah, it really is about, there's just the comment there, try, see what it feels for you. What's interesting is that the ADHD meds can work straight away. So it's not like you have to build up a certain tolerance. So you can take them as you like or not. And thank you. I see you. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Okay. So interesting comments coming through. Now I'm catching up on some of them.
Yeah, I love that. I'm also trialing Vyvanse, so yeah, no shame in the medication game. If it is not for you, I think that's great. But I also think that there should not be any shame around that. I see now that we've run out of time, which I hate. I would love to stay speaking about this forever. But just before we close off, I just want to ask you, Sarah, then what is your secret ingredient?
Oh, before I forget, I really am doing research into entrepreneurs and neurodivergence. So if there is anyone that follows up or wants to connect to be interviewed, I'll write a case study. You can get nice exposure and advice, and please connect through you if that's okay. My secret ingredient is to just keep shining. A colleague used to say, be your shiniest, noblest self, and all that means. So I wish that for all of us.
Wow. Thank you so much, Sarah. I think that's amazing. Yeah, and thank you for everyone who joined and who interacted and who made this feel like such a safe and amazing and welcoming space in the chat. I'm really grateful for everyone who, just showed up and said anything or didn't. And thank you so much, Sarah, for taking the time. I know that you have a very busy schedule, so we really appreciate it. I think Mo will be sending resources about this live recipe. So anything that Sarah sends, Mo will send on over to all of you. But yeah, you can catch Sarah's full recipe on the Heavy Chef site. And yeah, let's all stay in touch and stay connected. And yeah, have an amazing week, everyone.
Thank you so much for hosting and to Heavy Chef.
Amazing. Thank you, everyone. Bye.